End of Night. And so we will look forward to that as our next book. And then I am going to stop sharing because you are probably so tired of hearing me. And I would like to introduce Christopher Haney to you. And I'm delighted to have him as our guest. And I have to admit, when I was looking at this book and reading this book, I literally read through it. And then I was like, wait a minute. I have to go back. What did he say about that? And then I have little flags in here. And so depending on what you all ask, I have some, he has some things in here. He talks about the passenger pigeon and other birds that we know, like definitively, when was the last one of those species present with us? But he has some very thought-provoking things in here. And Christopher Haney is a biologist. He's a conservation scientist. And so that's very near and dear to my heart because he really does think about the science behind conservation. He's a lifelong birder. So I feel pretty secure in saying that he's a bird nerd because he is a lifelong birder. And he was the chief scientist at Defenders of Wildlife. And so he was engaged also in the Deepwater Horizon oil issue. And U.S. Wildlife Service invited him to lead a team of experts and technical folks in really, working on that particular issue. And if you can imagine how difficult that must have been, as a person who did some volunteer work myself, it was quite an event, and it lasted for quite a while. So he has been studying marine birds, and since 2013, he's been the president of Terramar Applied Sciences, and he has written this really extraordinary book about something that so many of us, and I recognize people on this call, aren't quite letting go of the ivory-billed woodpecker. We're still kind of holding hope that the ivory-billed woodpecker is out there. And so Chris has given us an opportunity to really think about some interesting things. And without further ado, Chris, I am going to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Alicia. It's good to be here with you across the country this evening. I hope you're having as pleasant an afternoon and evening as we had here in the East. A little cold front passed through, and that always brings migrants. And so tomorrow and Saturday, I will be out in Rock Creek Park seeing what I can see. Unless you're Rip Van Winkle and have been asleep for a long time, you know that the ivory-billed woodpecker provokes a lot of controversy. You can find people who are adamantly insistent that the bird is still alive, and you can find equally adamant people, some of them angrily so, with the belief that the bird is dead. And this actually is not something that's new in the American experience. It started in the 19-teens when so many of our wildlife species were disappearing and some birds did in fact go extinct. Then the ivory-bill kind of got pulled along in that tide of extinctions. The only problem was it wasn't extinct in 1917 or 18. When it was refound in the 1920s, it wasn't long, 5 or 6 years, it was declared extinct again. And of course, then it was rediscovered in the 30s. So this motif of lost ivory-bill and then refound ivory-bill is something that recurs in the American experience about once a generation, at least. And if you've paid any attention to the last year or so, you know that we're still declaring it extinct again. And of course, there are different viewpoints. Now, I'm not going to settle that today. And I'm going to say at the outset, my opinion is probably no better than anybody listening here. So I'll answer your questions, but that's not really where I'm going. What puzzled me is, why does this bird, this one, and not any other, provoke us so? Why does it captivate us? Why does it lead to such obsession in many cases of those that go out and look for it or that have really rigid beliefs? And so I want to read for you from my book, the last chapter. It's about a page and a half, and it kind of encapsulates what the book is about and what this phenomena about this lost woodpecker really is. What does that look like? So here we go. What then lies behind our pig-headed death wish for this bird? After decades of unchecked bias, a living ivory bill insults us immeasurably more than the dead version. A deceased bird is easy to fathom. It's gone. We fall back on truthy dogma for consolation, and our leftover ignorance is exploited for ulterior aims. Legend, trigger, nostalgia, quest, weapon, myth, obsession, enforcement, motivation, litmus test, allegory, even cartoon. But a live edition of this big woodpecker spotlights too many disquieting limits to human reason. A living bird also threatens the hallowed assumptions that we use to preserve various shaky social orders that unite us, especially those that are invested most heavily in the Ivory-Bill's story. Proprietorship over the Ivory-Bill's rediscovery is hotly contested. Can we say with confidence that Ivory-Bill is either extinct or that it still persists? No, we cannot, not with anything resembling unqualified certainty. The more rational stance is to shun the congruence bias, I'll explain what that is later, and respect each possibility still in play. Since the 1930s, the bird followed one of four paths. A remnant number may have postponed the inevitable, tantalizing a few of us intermittently, yet mostly hiding the woeful details of their inexorable spiral into extinction. Possibly, this remnant is still heading towards a disappearance, but the final date isn't set yet. Maybe the bird treaded demographic water, neither much increasing nor decreasing. Perhaps the Ivory-Bill squeezed through bottlenecks exacted by our greed, then edged slowly back from the abyss of species death. After never having had any robust clues about the population size or the trend in this woodpecker, I see no way to discriminate forcefully among such utterly different pathways. So, if another Ivory-Bill does ever materialize, we may not be able to rule out entirely that this next bird too isn't auditioning for a title role as last of its kind. Even if we could dodge all of our mental conceits and then elude the bird's phoenix-like chicanery, we still would be left to ponder, was it just luck? Are the odds finally turning around for a convincing encore in the bird's appearance? Instead, our social illiteracy about the intricate workings of probability condemns us to force a plausibly living bird to go extinct over and over again, a charade that obliges us always to prove life instead of death. Whatever its plight, the ivory-billed commands the last laugh. Like a scout vanished into some lost frontier, the woodpecker's absence evinces a kind of poignant dignity. For never yielding to man's deliverance and not dying in plain sight to appease our morbid curiosity, the ivory bill was typecast purely by accident as self-reliant, private, even noble. That archetype fixed an already magnificent species into our national psyche, enshrined it inside our native mythology. Like other protagonists from bygone eras, the ivory bill long fended off daunting adversaries, practically all of us, and our eccentric social packs too.
You hungry, Kipper?
Refusing to surrender, snubbing new order we tried to impose on it, the ivory bill lived out some unobtrusive destiny on its own terms, wild and free. Our own species does not assent very well to getting so totally vexed and vanquished by a mere bird. But no matter, dead or alive, the ivory bill has bested us.
Thanks, Chris. I love that. A mere bird. And when I think of all of the people who have spent so much time and energy sloshing through various places to hunt for this bird, to hear it, a mere bird.
Yeah, so I actually have kind of a contrary view about the ivory-billed woodpeckers. For me, it's not all that. And what I mean by that is, clearly it's enough for me to write a book about, but it's a big black, white, and red woodpecker, okay? But we've got another one right here in the United States, and we've got other big black, white, and red woodpeckers elsewhere, as close as Mexico in the same genus. So it puzzled me why, just based on appearance, why this bird was so compelling. And what I discovered is it's really not its biology or its appearance, it's what it does inside between our ears. That's where it's most unique. That's where it's most eccentric in how it sort of incites these reactions in us that frankly aren't proportional to the bird's, dare I say, significance in the grand scheme of the universe. And I'm not making light of extinction at all, because it's a serious, very, very serious thing. It's just that, you know, when I look at birds in North America, if I could get into a time capsule and go back, I'd want to see Carolina parakeet first. It's our only parakeet. It was orange and green and this gaudy. I want to see that, or maybe great auk, this flightless bird that was like a penguin of the Northern Hemisphere. I even prefer to go back and see bison licking at a salt lick in my home state of Tennessee, which occurred in the 1800s. There are lots of things I would want to see before ivory-bill, but that's just me. And it led me to think, well, there's something going on here that's different about this bird. And it's basically the human reaction and the human relationship to the bird that's different.
So I do have to wonder how many people who have joined us this evening, given the opportunity, would go look for an ivory-billed woodpecker. I'm raising my hand. Because it is so, you know, it's a big bird. Now I'm with you, and Jeannie Thompson, thank you. She's got a thumbs up, and Chris, yep, thumbs up. Chris, have you gone out to look at all? Have you done any field trips out for the ivory-billed woodpecker?
I missed out mostly. I did make it down to Arkansas for the large woodpecker symposium. I think that was about it.
Yeah. You and me both. I mean, I was on the outskirts of. I traveled through Arkansas, and the towns around there were like, oh, home of the ivory-billed woodpecker, and I thought it was great because these people who were living in some of those towns in that swampy area weren't big birders, weren't big conservationists, but they saw people coming to their little towns in their areas, looking for this bird. And they were like, hey, we'll serve you some coffee. I'll make lunch for you. It was great. There was just something about like the feel of it, just that kind of community support for looking for something. And I saw somebody else had a hand up saying that they would go. Was that you, Sheila, or somebody had a hand up that said, I'd go.
It was, I would go.
Yeah.
You never know what you come across, looking for a specific
Anybody out there of the firm conviction that the bird is extinct?
Hey, Chris, I'm hearing some silence. Oh, Buddy Campbell is saying he's like in that camp.
Yeah, so let me give you some information that you might not be aware of. It was a little study that the Hayes brothers did after the Arkansas incident in the early 2000s. They surveyed a spectrum of bird watchers, not a segment of the bird watching community. Let's just put it that way. And the majority of people were of the persuasion of possibly or probably. They weren't willing to, the majority were not willing to go all in on extinction or all in on life. And I would submit that that's surprisingly rational. It doesn't mean, though, that the belief in extinction and the belief in the birds still being alive can be equally weighted. They can't. We may or may not have time to talk about that tonight. But those are not, it's not like tossing a coin and we might be right or wrong either way. I'm going to give you something that is not very well known. Would anybody like to guess at how many sighting reports there have been of ivory-billed woodpecker? Now, I don't mean people who saw a pileated and called their local Audubon Society in a mistaken way. I mean records that were vetted by the Fish and Wildlife Service and pulled in and assembled into the last recovery plan. That's the official document that helps identify things to help a species on the endangered list. Anybody want to guess at how many sighting reports there have been of ivory-billed woodpeckers since 1944? That's the date that many people believe the bird went extinct. You want to guess? All right, Steve says 100-ish. Anybody else? Well, he's almost half. There's over 200 incidents of the ivory-billed woodpecker being recorded since 1944, the year that it allegedly went extinct. Does everyone know the basis for that declaration of extinction? It was an amateur bird artist who went down to the Singer Tract in Louisiana as it was being logged, saw, with the help of a local guide, a female ivory-billed woodpecker winging her way over this devastated forest. He painted that picture of the last ivory-bill. Now, if you're a casual birder, you know that somebody's sketch of a sight record would never be accepted as proof of a living ivory-bill. Why on earth we ever gave it such power to declare the bird extinct? Well, I don't know, but it's not a rational reason. But that story got repeated so often, and it became part of our social discourse that it became truth. Repeat something often enough, then it'll become true. And it did. And so now and for 100 years, the story has been the bird's dead. So every time we have to prove life. And I'm sorry, that's not the way it works. We have to evidence death. Yes, that's true. But we don't have to prove life. If I don't see my Uncle Larry in 10 years, and I haven't, I don't assume that he's dead. I wait. I get evidence, or God forbid, I get an invitation to an event celebrating his life. But we, in our minds, find ourselves in this position of feeling compelled to prove that a real thing is still there. And if you're a birder and you're a part of a checklist committee, fine, it's a sport, it's a pastime, it's a hobby. Set whatever rules you want. That's not the way science works. And so today we're in this position where our social identity dictates which ivory-billed woodpecker is there or not there. The ivory-billed by competitive bird watching is nothing like the ivory-billed woodpecker that conservation biology would see. That's nothing like hardcore science hypothesis testing would see, which resembles not at all the one that a cognitive psychologist would see. So our social identity dictates which bird we see. And if you want to have a general reason why people have such different reactions, it's often because of the social identity that they most subscribe to. If they're a competitive bird watcher, the idea that birders wouldn't be able to find an ivory bill irritates them to no end. But if you're in science, you know that things disappear all the time, and they may come back regular or they may not. They may come back. Sometimes we've had cases of birds go missing for 350 years. So it's not unusual for a bird to be lost. This doesn't mean it's alive. It just means that we cannot, with conviction and with certainty, say either way. The rational stance is like those birders that the Hayes brothers surveyed and say, hey, I don't know, maybe, possibly. That's the more rational stance. The next most rational stance is to assume that the bird is still alive. The least evidenced stance, the one that has the least evidence for it, is that the bird is extinct.
So, Chris, I'm kind of hearing no news is good news. if we can't prove it, then maybe there's still hope. And I know Steve is actually, Steve, you've gone out and looked for the bird, have you not? I'm looking for your square on here. You're still with us? Somewhere he's here. Or maybe he's still, oh no, there he is. Yeah. So I do know a number.
Sorry, yeah. I couldn't figure out how to hit mute. Yeah, I did a 2-week stint after the initial sight. Actually, we were there the first weekend of the initial sighting, and we only saw one other birder there while we were there, and it was David Sibley, which was interesting enough. But I did spend 2 weeks looking with my good friend Paul Sykes, who has been searching for ivory bills since probably the 50s, 60s. And we'll chase down every report that he ever gotten in all those years. And so, yeah, that's my experience.
Are you outside at your fire?
I am. You probably hear Canada geese out there in the river, but
Yep.
the sandhill cranes aren't calling right now, but they're usually here a couple hours ago.
Yeah. Well, thanks for sharing that with us.
Sure.
Yeah, there are certainly a lot of people who have gone to look for this bird. I can think of another, a wide variety of people from all walks of lives that have gone to look for the ivory-billed, at places that it could have potentially been sighted. A gentleman named Jim Carpenter, who owns the Wild Birds Unlimited franchise, has spent some time, searching for the ivory-billed woodpecker. Jamie Hill, who does the purple martin somebody help me with the name, Purple Martin Conservation Association, I think it is, has gone to look. I mean, lots of people have spent a lot of time and energy out there looking for this bird and hoping to find it. And Chris, it is interesting how many people have dedicated so much time and energy and money and funding to go buy this, to go find this particular bird. And when I heard you say, and you have in here quite a bit of information, the Carolina parakeet and other birds that that have gone extinct, you know, and I remember, and maybe you'll remember who said this, but somebody quoted once that the parakeet darkened the skies.
That was
And
the
then
pigeon.
the pigeon, thank you, the pigeon. And then and now we don't, where is it? We don't have it anymore. So why do you feel like we're so obsessed about these, like you say in here, I just lost my place, darn it. I have bookmarks in here of different things that you've said. You said something about buried alive.
Yeah, and that's one of the reasons why this bird has such a strong, an intractable hold on our minds. Death is a very powerful meme. It grabs the human attention, seizes it, and keeps it. So if we're, you know, we have life and death here, once we hear the word death, our mind's going to lock on to that. Because we've declared this bird extinct over and over again, only to be proven wrong, or at least cast doubts on our assumption. So you have this recurring symbol of birth, death, birth, death. Does that sound like something? It's the phoenix. And these phoenix motifs have parallels across human cultures. Native Americans have them. They occurred in Europe and Asia. This idea of death and resurrection, in fact, a sort of underlies some of the premises to the world's major religions. And again, the woodpecker wasn't trying to do this, but the fact that we've allowed the bird, we've been hastily declaring it extinct, and then it would be rediscovered. And that created almost a kind of enhanced power of this bird over other birds, over other animals, to seize our attention. It was mythical. It was magical. And that's unconscious. It's not that we would rationally necessarily think those things, but we are human and we occur inside social identities and inside cultures. So that death and resurrection, the phoenix-like quality of the bird, is, I think, one reason that people go out and look. Another reason is that they believe that the bird is really there. And if I've spoken to probably 10 or 12 searchers in the last year or two, and they don't even care what anybody else thinks. They've seen it. It's like, well, whatever. The rest of you can debate this all you want. I saw it. I know what I saw. And there's this belief that people are going out and making it up, or they're mistaking it. They're hasty. They're not very experienced. They're mistaking it with pileated woodpecker. They want to put it on their life list. Here's the problem. Why do you need to spend years and years to show that you have a lack of prudence? Why not go out in an afternoon and show your whatever? Well, why would you go back over and over and over again? It's because they're convinced that it's still there. And they're not, it's not like they're not coming back with some really intriguing finds either. They're not getting completely stumped. And I want to say something here that might explain why it's so hard for us to believe that it's still there and why it's hard to find. Let's be generous. It's not Christmas yet, but let's just pretend that there are 100 ivory bills still living. Okay? And let's sprinkle those 100 ivory bills across 10 southern states, North Carolina to Texas and Arkansas at least. Do you know what the probability of finding one ivory-billed woodpecker out of 100 is using the conventional methods that birders and ornithologists use to survey in the field? It's infinitesimally small. It is 1 in hundreds of thousands or 1 in millions, the chance to go and use the e-birding technique or point counts is what most field biologists use for birds to estimate density. If we use those techniques, there's practically no chance at all of us finding an ivory-billed woodpecker, even if it's there. So probability tells us that we're not likely to see one, even if it's there. Now, if we additionally look at what early naturalists said about this bird and how wary it was. One naturalist called it the most cunning thing that wore feathers. And yet, you will see birders today who say it's half tame. Well, this is nonsense. It was never tame. There's 35 references that say for collectors and ornithologists were complaining bitterly about how hard it was to shoot. So if you put wary behavior on top of a very few individuals and you sprinkle them across a big area, you can logically account for very few sightings or very difficult to come by sightings.
So very unlikely that the ivory-billed woodpecker would show up on one of our Christmas bird count circles as we do those. I do have a question from one of our participants. He's asking, what was the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service rationale for declining it extinct? Or declaring it extinct, sorry.
You got me. Let me tell you how science evidences extinction. Now, it can't prove it. It can't prove extinction, but how it evidences it. Essentially what you do, and the Fish and Wildlife Service did not do this, what you essentially do is go out often enough and sample over and over and over again everywhere that an animal can be. By the way, BirdLife International's standard for extinction is surveys across the entire range of the individual with enough statistical power to show that it's really not there, not the result of our fallible detections, and that the last individual has died. Well, that's a pretty high bar. That's tough to meet. Let me give you an example of how tough that is. If I wanted to show that the ivory bill was missing, gone, from the Tensas National Wildlife Refuge in Louisiana, that's where Jim Tanner studied the bird in the 1930s, the old Singer Tract. Today, it's a national wildlife refuge. Now, let's suppose it's 90,000 acres, so it's not a small place. Now, I would have to put observers in that 90,000 acres such that they could survey the entire area, not miss one. The bird couldn't be hiding behind a trunk. It couldn't be flying from one part of the refuge to the other and they just missed it. They couldn't flush it 200 meters ahead. You would have to have enough people in there to see everything at once, all of those trees, all of the canopies, to declare the bird was not there. And you know how many times you would have to repeat that process? 250 times to come to a conclusion with 99% probability, yes, the bird's really gone. Now, imagine doing that across all 10 states that the bird might be found in. Of course, this is impossible. So we're left in this conundrum of not ever getting enough evidence to truly and faithfully declare it likely to be extinct. So I don't know why the Fish and Wildlife Service did what they did. I learned of what they were proposing when my book went to the publisher. And because I work with the Fish and Wildlife Service very closely, I felt compelled to call them up and say, look, I've got a book about how fallible, how wrong we are about these decisions. I didn't know you were making this decision. They go, oh, we know. But I can't tell you what was in their minds when they did this. And I don't know why now, why this year or last year, I can't give you a reason for any of that. I have no idea.
Well, I used to work for the Fish and Wildlife Service, and I can't even go there myself. And so did the gentleman who's asking. So I have a couple more questions for you. Anne, and I'm not sure how much of a question this is, but Anne was kind of saying that recent sightings of various species, monkeys, fish, miscellaneous things, have appeared to have been extinct lately, makes me wonder if they've changed their habitat. And then the second question I have in the chat here is, you had mentioned earlier something about cognitive bias, and Wayne is actually asking, you said you might come back to that, and what is its relevance here? So two different questions for you there.
Okay, let me answer both of them in sequence. Can you repeat the first one again?
So Anne was just saying that she's wondering.
I remember now. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Species that are rediscovered. Yeah, we actually have a term for that. It's called Romeo error. When we declare a species extinct too soon and it's refound 10, 20, 30, 50, 100 years later, we call it Romeo error for reasons that might be obvious, but if not, it's a tragedy. When we declare something extinct or dead too soon, it can lead to worse stuff. If it's not really dead and gone, we might relax our protections on it too soon. I worry that, frankly, with birds, if they're declared extinct, I'm not sure that the Migratory Bird Treaty Act covers them any longer from being shot. So that's one example. Now, how often does this happen? Well, it happens a lot. The last century, it's happened over somewhere between 400 and 500 times for birds and mammals. It's very common for birds to disappear and be rediscovered later. I have a slide that I present in some of my talks that has kind of a circle of species that went missing for maybe a decade or two, all the way up to the longest one that I know of, Bermuda petrel, which was missing for 350 years. To Wayne's question, what is the congruence bias and why is that relevant about the ivory-bill? Congruence bias is something that really infects scientists. It's something that people in my field really struggle with. And it's when we don't come up with enough hypotheses to explain something. So when we are trying to explain why is the ivory-billed not easily detected? Well, one hypothesis is it's extinct. Another hypothesis is, well, it's going extinct and the number is so small we can't find them. A third hypothesis is, well, the population is just so low, maybe it's not going up or down, but there's so few of them that we can't find them. Or 4, it still has a population size, it's tiny, but it's creeping up, maybe a bird or two every 25 years, but we still can't detect because we don't have the means to distinguish between those hypotheses. If we latch on to one and then tell the world that we're certain of it, that's congruence bias. And scientists are guilty of this all the time, of not coming up with enough explanations for some phenomena that we see in nature. So like this, suppose I see my neighbor in the grocery store and I say, hello. And they say, "Hmm." Well, I have several hypotheses. I did something to irritate them. They didn't hear it and they have some congestion, or they had a bad day, and on and on and on. If I latch onto one explanation without really doing due diligence, that's called congruence bias. So it can affect people other than scientists too.
Thanks for that, Chris. I have been with a number of birders, and somebody will say, oh, there's, whatever kind of bird it is. And and I'm looking at it and I'm like, I don't know that that's that bird. And I think, and sometimes I've done that, I'm like, oh, look, it's a, whatever it is. And it's like, because I really want to know, I really want that to be the bird. I really want it to be what I'm seeing. I know that's that bird. Yep, it is. So it happens.
Birders feel like they need to identify everything. Just to give you it's so freeing not to have to identify everything. I know I e-bird a lot. And when I do my walks through Rock Creek Park, I keep a tally of everything that I see. But in fall, there are lots of warblers that aren't easy to tell apart. And then there's the Epidnex flycatchers. And I can't tell you how freeing and relaxing it is to just put Epidnex spa or warbler spa in my little species in my tally and just keep going. Some I can identify, some I just don't even bother with. But birders oftentimes, particularly in groups, birders like to sort of show off, and there's a little bit of one-upmanship in occasion. But here's the thing, and I love birding. I've been a birder much longer than I've been a scientist, and I will always be one, and it will always be near and dear to my heart. And I hope I don't offend anybody here tonight, but birding is not a reliable way to discern how the universe works. It's a pastime, it's a hobby. We need other ways to try to figure out how natural phenomena work. I wouldn't even tell you that science alone would be enough, never mind one particular kind of science. The ivory bill that I think that I see today, I didn't see 20 years ago, is informed a lot more by cognitive psychology than biology now. But even in biology, I find I have to go talk to statisticians and population ecologists and behavioral ecologists. And when I look at all of those fields and I try to make some sense out of this, I do not find it impossible or even implausible that the ivory bill could still be alive. If you want to read, if you want to bury yourself in some trivia, go research on Google how a bird in Australia has done the same thing to the Aussies down under. That bird's called the night parrot. And it flummoxed and confused and taunted and haunted Australians for the better part of a century. Same way the ivory-billed has done to us. Why? Because it flirted just below everyone's perceptual radar. In fact, this is so cool. When the Aboriginal people that are native to Australia were informed about the bird, scientists finally caught up with it through some really interesting ways. We don't have time for that, but they found it. They found a location where they could repeat sightings, and they actually recruited and taught Aboriginal people to be like rangers to protect this bird. And you know what the elders said? They went, oh, yeah, we heard that noise, but we thought it was an evil spirit. So think about that. That bird hid from the people that were closest to nature. who lived in that area for thousands of years. And it dodged their, the bird dodged their awareness, which I'm hoping it is, you know, humbles us a little bit and saying, you know, there's still a lot of mystery out there. There's still things that we can learn. There's still enigmas. And oh, someone asked me the name of the bird. It was night parrot. Night parrot in Australia.
Birds are certainly fascinating. Thank you, Chris, for spending this evening with us. And for those of you who have not had an opportunity to read the book completely, Chris has certainly brought up a lot of interesting things. And it would make a fun, would definitely make a fun gift for somebody who is intrigued by the Ivory-Billed Woodpecker. I like to hold on to I enjoy birds, and sometimes I don't know their names or exactly where they are or what they're doing, and I'm okay with that. But I appreciate your spending the evening with us, Chris, and everyone. Thank you for joining us this evening, and I hope you'll consider joining us on October the 27th when we discuss The End of Night with our author for the month of October. And I hope that you all have a great rest of your evening. And please, if you ever see the Ivory-Billed Woodpecker, let Chris know. Let me know too. I'd like to know.
The more eyes that are looking, that's the neat thing about probability. The more you look, the more people, the more area they cover, the more time you spend, the odds go up.
Yes, yes. So go out there, have fun, enjoy the birds, and thank you again for joining us. And just a shout out to a couple folks that I know personally. Russ, thanks for joining us this evening. Thanks, Steve. Thanks, Chris. Appreciate you joining us. And thanks to all of you who have been on the Bird Book Club monthly discussions. And we'll look forward to seeing you next month on October the 7th. So thanks so much, everybody. Have a great evening.
Good fall birding.
Yes, those confusing fall warblers. Have fun.
Bye.
Good night, everyone.
Thank you, Christopher.
Chris, I'm seeing some thank you, great insights. Thanks so much.